Chapter 1. Imagine a city built inside a massive bomb. In 1971, Norway almost pulled the red trigger. High above the Arctic Circle, silence hides a secret. A blueprint buried for decades in frozen archives. They called it the future of human civilization. But the math pointed toward a massive explosion. A metropolis powered entirely by volatile hydrogen gas. No fossil fuels. No carbon. Just pure energy. And a terrifying risk of total vaporization. This was not a dream for the weak. It was a gamble with the laws of physics. Scientists calculated the blast radius of a leak. It could erase an entire fjord in seconds. Yet, the construction crews began to dig deep. They carved into the granite with industrial fury. Every strike of the hammer echoed through the ice. The world was looking at the moon landing. Norway was looking into a chemical abyss. Beneath the northern lights, a nightmare was breathing. You think you know the history of energy. You are wrong. This was a project born of pure desperation. A secret society of engineers defying every warning. They wanted to harvest the power of the sun. But they brought the sun into a cave. The air inside those tunnels smelled like ozone. It felt like standing next to a lightning strike. Can you feel the pressure building up now? The ice above is thick. The danger below is absolute. This is the story of a lost world. Welcome to the city that never woke up. Chapter 2. Why did they choose the most isolated coast? The location was a ghost town before 1971. No roads led to the primary excavation site. Supplies arrived by unmarked ships in the dark. The government denied the project even existed. Even the workers had no clear maps. They were told to dig and stay silent. Every paycheck came from a mysterious offshore fund. Who was truly financing this hydrogen revolution? Was it a peaceful search for green energy? Or a front for something much more lethal? Some say the blueprints were stolen from Germany. Others whisper about a pact with private giants. The local fishermen saw lights deep underwater. Strange vibrations shook their wooden boats at night. Something was being pressurized beneath the heavy tides. Giant steel containers were lowered into the depths. They were not designed for ordinary water storage. They looked like shells for a cosmic weapon. The blueprints show rooms with no exit doors. What were they planning to store in there? The mystery deepens with every recovered page. Files are still missing from the National Library. Names of lead scientists have been erased. It is like a ghost edited the past. We found a single photograph of the site. It shows a wall of reinforced titanium glass. Why protect a city from its own air? The silence of the fjord is an answer. They were hiding a monster in the mountain. Chapter 3. The deeper we go, the colder it gets. In 1971, a whistleblower disappeared near the site. He left a notebook filled with frantic warnings. He spoke of the invisible flame consuming oxygen. He claimed the hydrogen was not for electricity. He believed it was a fuel for escape. Escape from what? The world was stable then. Or so the history books tell us now. The blueprints suggest a massive underground transit system. Magnetic rails designed for speeds beyond belief. This was technology decades ahead of its time. Where did the knowledge come from so suddenly? The engineering teams were locked in a facility. They could not contact their families for months. High-frequency antennas were installed on the mountain peaks. They weren't transmitting radio or television signals. They were monitoring the pulse of the earth. A rhythmic thumping started in the summer of '71. It sounded like a giant heart beating underground. The project had a code name, the Blue Lung. But the lung was breathing in lethal gas. There was no plan for a civilian evacuation. This city was meant for a chosen few. A survival pod for a coming global catastrophe. If the project was safe, why the secrecy? If it was progress, why the steel bunkers? The mystery is a puzzle of coal iron. Each piece is sharper than the last one. We are just scratching the frozen surface. Chapter 4. Then came the unexplained tremors of late autumn. The Norwegian seismic sensors recorded a strange pattern. It was not an earthquake from the tectonic plates. It was a series of controlled, high-pressure releases. Someone was testing the limits of the containers. The pressure inside reached a critical, screaming point. We found a letter from a terrified welder. He described pipes glowing with a faint light. He said the metal was singing a high-pitched song. It was the sound of molecular stress. The hydrogen was trying to tear the mountain apart. Then, the black budget funding stopped overnight. A fleet of helicopters arrived at dawn in October. They didn't bring supplies or new workers. They brought demolition experts and heavy concrete mixers. Every entrance was filled with liquid stone. Every witness was moved to a different district. The official story was a simple budget cut. They said the technology was too expensive. But the equipment was left inside the dark. Millions of dollars in precision tech, buried alive. Why not recover the expensive titanium spheres? Why seal the tunnels with such desperate haste? They weren't just closing a failed project. They were burying a mistake that was waking up. They left the lights on down there. Some say the heart is still beating. The pressure is still looking for a way out. Chapter 5. The blueprints revealed a fatal industrial flaw. 1971 technology could not contain the pressure. They built massive spheres of reinforced chromium steel. Each tank was designed to hold liquid fire. But hydrogen atoms are the smallest in existence. They don't just leak through the valves. They migrate directly through the solid metal walls. This process is known as hydrogen embrittlement. It turns tough steel into brittle, shattered glass. The mountain foundations began to develop microscopic cracks. Engineers heard the sound of steel screaming at night. It was a high-pitched moan of dying metal. The entire city was built on a fracturing floor. A single spark would ignite the entire fjord. Imagine a fireball 2 miles wide and invisible. You wouldn't see the flame. You would only feel the sudden, absolute heat. The safety sensors were failing one by one. The air inside the labs was becoming explosive. One technician dropped a wrench on the floor. The spark almost triggered a national catastrophe. They were breathing in a giant, pressurized bomb. Every breath was a gamble with a vacuum. The walls were sweating a lethal, silent fuel. There was no escape route for the workers. They were sealed inside a steel pressure cooker. Chapter 6. The cooling systems were the heart of the project. They pumped freezing seawater through titanium veins. But the salt began to eat the seals alive. Corrosion was the enemy they could not defeat. They needed temperatures near absolute zero to survive. The power required to cool the city was immense. It drained the local grid into total darkness. Nearby villages reported flickering lights every midnight. The project was consuming more than just electricity. It was consuming the very stability of the region. Internal memos mentioned a thermal runaway event. If the pump stopped, the city would vaporize. There were no backup generators for the primary core. The design was a cycle of pure madness. They relied on the freezing Arctic water alone. But the water was warming up from the friction. The turbines were spinning at impossible, lethal speeds. A cloud of frozen vapor filled the main hall. You couldn't see your own hands in front. One wrong step meant falling into a cryo tank. The workers wore suits made of heavy lead. They looked like divers in a dry, dead sea. The hum of the machines became a roar. It was the sound of a mechanical god waking. Chapter 7. Then they discovered the blue leak phenomenon. The hydrogen began to glow under intense pressure. A strange, ghostly light filled the lower levels. It wasn't electricity. It was something far more terrifying. The gas was ionizing the very air they breathed. People started reporting vivid, waking nightmares in 1971. The high-pressure environment was warping their sensory perception. They saw shadows moving through the steel walls. Was it the gas? Or was it the vibration? The frequency of the turbines matched the human heart. It created a feeling of constant, crushing dread. Some engineers refused to enter the lower sectors. They claimed the machines were developing a pulse. The blueprints show a central stability chamber. It was a room lined with pure gold leaf. Gold does not react with the drifting hydrogen atoms. But they couldn't line the entire city in gold. The cost was astronomical. The ambition was bankrupting the secret Norwegian board. They were building a palace for a king. But they were building it inside a furnace. The pressure gauges finally hit the red zone. The needles snapped under the incredible physical strain. The countdown to the explosion had silently begun. Chapter 8. The final failure occurred in the ventilation shafts. A massive surge of pressure reversed the airflow. It sucked the oxygen out of the living quarters. For 60 seconds, the city became a vacuum. People collapsed where they stood, gasping for nothing. The automated systems triggered a hard lockdown. Heavy blast doors slammed shut across every sector. Families were separated by 3 feet of solid steel. There was no manual override for the electronic locks. The computers were slaved to the pressure sensors. If the pressure rose, the doors stayed shut. It was a tomb designed by an algorithm. The 9-word chain was the only rule left: secure the core. Abandon the men. Save the project. They chose to let the workers suffocate in silence. It was cheaper than risking a surface-level detonation. The screams were lost in the roar of turbines. No one on the outside heard a thing. The Norwegian wilderness remained cold and perfectly still. Deep below, the lights began to turn red. The project had officially turned into a massacre. They had tamed the sun's power for a moment. Then the sun decided to burn them all. Chapter 9. The pressure sensors eventually reached a point of no return. 1971 technology was screaming for a release valve. But the designers had omitted any external vents. They feared a massive plume of flammable gas. If the sky ignited, the secret was out. So they let the internal pressure cook the mountain. Deep inside the granite, the stone began to melt. This was not supposed to be a volcanic event. It was a molecular failure of the Earth itself. The hydrogen was literally dissolving the rock structure. High-ranking officials watched the monitors in absolute silence. They saw the heat maps turning a deep purple. The automated cooling was a drop in the ocean. Every pump was already working at 300%. A strange, metallic rain began to fall inside. It was condensed mercury from the failing instruments. The engineers realized the blue lung was collapsing. It was no longer a city for the future. It was a dying star trapped in a cave. Every structural beam was warped by the heat. The ground was no longer solid beneath their feet. They were standing on a liquid, exploding floor. The nightmare was finally becoming a physical reality. Chapter 10. Imagine if the seals had failed 1 second sooner. The North Sea would have felt the shockwave. Scientists believe it could have triggered a tsunami. A wall of water hitting the coast of England. We would remember 1971 as the year of fire. Europe would have lost its entire northern coastline. If the hydrogen cloud had reached the atmosphere, it might have burned the ozone layer away instantly. A hole in the sky that never truly closed. We would be living in a very different world. A world with permanent radiation and chemical scars. Perhaps the government knew this risk was coming. Was the project a weapon or a power plant? If it was a weapon, who was the target? If it was power, why hide it so deep? We almost traded our safety for a cheap spark. The arrogance of the planners was truly limitless. they gambled with the lives of millions for ego. One small spark would have changed human history. We are lucky the concrete arrived when it did. The what if is a ghost that haunts Norway. It is a shadow over every modern energy project. We came inches away from a global catastrophe. Chapter 11. There are reports of a second, hidden facility. Some documents suggest a sector be even deeper down. What if they didn't actually stop the experiment? What if they just moved it further away? We find records of mysterious seismic activity in 1975. Long after the official project was declared dead. The tremors had the same rhythmic, mechanical pulse. This suggests the turbines never truly stopped spinning. Perhaps the city was built for a different species. Or for a different version of our own future. If the project survived, who is living there now? There are stories of men who never returned home. Their families were paid to stay perfectly silent. They were told their husbands died in mining accidents. But no bodies were ever recovered for burial. If the city is active, the danger is doubled. The pressure would be 1 billion times higher now. The entire planet could be sitting on a fuse. We are walking on a crust of thin ice. Below us, a chemical sun might still burn. The horror is not what happened in 1971. The horror is what might be happening today. Chapter 12. What if the hydrogen city was actually a success? What if the disaster was a staged cover story? This theory is gaining ground in secret circles. They claim the elite moved in during the 80s. A hidden society living in a clean, high-tech utopia. While we burn oil, they use the infinite blue. They watch us from their pressurized, golden halls. This would explain the sudden leaps in tech. Where did the fiber optic revolution truly begin? Maybe it was birthed in a fjord in 1971. If they have the power, they have control. They control the weather and the global markets. The blue lung became the brain of the world. But a brain needs a body to feed on. We are the body, and they are the parasite. The secrecy was not about safety or danger. It was about maintaining a monopoly on the future. They let us think the project was a failure. They want us to stay afraid of the dark. But the dark is where they keep the light. The truth is hidden behind 1 million tons of concrete. Chapter 13, The Legacy. Today, the site is a graveyard of broken dreams. The entrance is a massive, nameless slab of gray. No plaques commemorate the men who died there. No history book mentions the 1971 hydrogen race. But the ground still feels warm to the touch. In the dead of winter, the snow melts. It creates a circle of green in the white. Nature is reacting to the heat of the past. Hikers report hearing a faint, low-frequency hum. It is a sound that vibrates in your teeth. The blue lung is still trying to breathe. The mountain is a tomb for a dead era. But some tombs are never truly, safely closed. The rust is eating the last of the seals. The legacy is a warning for our own generation. We seek clean energy at any possible cost. But we forget the price of absolute pressure. The Norwegian government still refuses to comment on it. They want 1971 to stay in the shadows. But the shadows are starting to glow blue again. The future is coming back for its revenge. Watch the fjords. Listen to the mountain's heavy heart. The city is still there. Waiting for a spark.